Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We will begin shortly. Welcome and good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Will Crosswell, and I am the Chief Retail Officer for Arden Credit Union. We've had several virtual workshops, and sometimes technology is not the easiest to use, so please be patient with us. And we know there's a lot going on in each of our lives, but know that Arden is there for you every step of the way. If you have any additional banking or borrowing needs, please keep us in mind. Now, if you need to ask a question during the workshop, please click the Questions tab and type in your question. The photo to the left is the screen of an iPad, and the photo to the right is the screen of a desktop. We have Lisa from Arden's marketing department on the line, who will relay the questions to Hudson throughout the Q&A session. Please know that this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on Arden's website within the next few days. So let's hear about our speaker. Hudson has been sharing his passions for wine since the start of his restaurant career. At the age of 13, he began working in the restaurant business, where he was taught proper service work in the dining room. One Saturday night, he was asked to taste something at the bar by some friends of the owner. That particular something was a 1966 Chateau Rothschild, and from that moment on, he had an interest in wine. For the past 14 years, Hudson has created a following while doing wine dinners as a published wine columnist for various magazines and at many local venues. His unique style is influenced by the history of wine and enjoyed by experts and novices alike. And as I always say about wine, regardless of whether the glass is half full or half empty, there's always room for more. So let's get started. Take it away, Hudson.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. So tonight we're going to be doing some really fantastic wine and truffle pairings. These wine and chocolate pairings are kind of unique because most people, quite honestly, talk about wine and chocolate going together all the time. And humorously enough, unless you have the right pairing, wine and chocolate don't always work too well together. They fight a little bit. And in the case of what we're going to taste tonight, we've sort of crafted these pairings to really go, I think, extraordinarily well. The truffles that you have in front of you, or that you should have gotten, are from Sweetest Fudge here in the Reading Terminal Market. Absolutely dynamite, and we're going to be tasting through each one of those and pairing them up with a little bit of wine that we have as we go. So I don't know what everybody may have gone out to buy, and I gave some suggestions of what everybody should have. But hopefully everybody went out and got a little bit of sparkling with which to start. And the sparkling that I'm actually going to have is from a producer called Grape. Grape is a winery in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And most people would think, who in heaven's name would have ever thought to put a winery in Albuquerque, New Mexico? And part of the reason for Grape being there is because they were on a little bit of a holiday as well as a little bit of a mission to search out and find a site to have here in the U.S. And they were doing this coming from Champagne, coming from an outlying region in Champagne called Beton. And this Grape family, headed by Gilbert Grape, was the father at the time, and then his son Laurent, and family went on holiday. And they were invited to go for a tasting in New Mexico, and they thought the same thing. There's wine in New Mexico. They were used to California because that's where great producers like Mom and Moet and Tatger had all gone and acquired property and produced a little bit of sparkling wine there. So after they tasted and saw the vineyards in New Mexico, they were pretty impressed. They ended up searching out and finding a piece of property in Albuquerque and founding a little winery in 1984. So from there, first release was in 1989, their first release of sparkling wines. And Laurent really heads all of that up. He actually made his first sparkling wine at the winery in Beton in 1981 with his father. And he started out at the age of 7. His earliest memories were really being in the winery and in the vineyards with his father, learning from there. Oh, I turned my webcam off. See, that's that technology at work thing that we were talking about. I'm back. So anyway, so we can move to the first slide if we want. I'm having slides don't want to move for me. So sparkling winemaking itself is not the easiest thing in the world. It actually was often considered a fault. Many of you have probably heard the story of Dom Perignon, who was credited with inventing sparkling wine, inventing champagne. It's really not the case. The earliest sparkling wines were produced not in Champagne but in Saint Hilaire. Is where they were first produced commercially. That's down in southern France. Now, from there, they really came about in Champagne a little bit later. What Dom Perignon was credited, or really is credited in doing, is seeking out why bottles of wine were exploding in the cellars, because CO2 being trapped in the bottles back then sealed up with a regular cork because they weren't making sparkling wine intentionally. They were just making still wine. These bottles would explode. And when that happened, it would cause a chain reaction and they would explode all over the place. So he was actually, charged with figuring out what would cause that to happen. In that as well, he was figuring out what the best grapes to grow in the vineyards where he were. And they settled on the 3 principal grape varieties for Champagne, which are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Now, these are the grape varieties that you see for Champagne pretty much exclusively. But in addition to that, most of the sparkling wines that are made around the world today tend to be made with those grapes. Now, there are other grapes that are utilized for making sparkling wine in various places. In Prosecco, the grape is a grape called Glera, and that's not made the same way Champagne is made. This is made in the method champenois, or traditional method. So that's what we have in front of us. Now, I'm going to show you all how to properly open a bottle of sparkling wine as well, because people often get nervous about this. They think the bottle's going to explode in their hands, or, I will say that you don't want to aim this towards your friends unless you want to make enemies, because if you actually shoot them with a cork, they'll probably be angry with you. So the first thing we want to do is remove this little capsule on here. Most bottles of bubbly will contain a tab that's pretty easy to find, and you can see it right there. You can just peel that off and undo that. Then take the rest of this little capsule off. Then you want to remove the cage. Now, I'm going to show you, and I was taught by a Frenchman, how to properly open sparkling wine, Champagne specifically. And what you want to do is put your thumb on top here, and then find the little key. The key looks like it's back here, and it's this little twisted wire. So I'm putting my thumb on there, and then you undo it. It's about 5.5 to 6 turns. When you do that, you now want to leave your thumb on the cage, because if you take your thumb off of here, this could be volatile. It could pop right off. You could have sparkling wine spraying everywhere, and you don't necessarily want that unless you're, celebrating a Formula One race. So in this particular case, we're going to grab the top with our hand. You want to use your pointer finger, keep your thumb up there in the palm of your hand, and just give the bottle a twist. You don't want to twist the top, but just give the bottle itself a little twist, and it'll start to come out right away. You want to put back pressure on there so that it doesn't fly off, and just put a little bit of pressure on and ease it out. Okay, a lot of people want that great big celebratory pop, but when you have that big celebratory pop, you're not keeping the bubbles in your actual liquid. The bubbles are escaping. All that gas is going away. So in this particular case, that's what we did. And you notice I had just that light little hiss. Now, another cool thing we could have done would be to saber this, but that's a whole other thing, and that makes a big mess. It's a lot of fun. It's great to do outside. In here, we'd end up mopping. If you did it in your kitchen, you'd end up cleaning up and probably breaking something. So now we have our glass. I actually like, most people will use a champagne flute, or they may use a coupe, which is the sort of looking like a martini, rounded martini glass for their sparkling wine. I like a wine glass. You just want to pour about 2 ounces or so in there. And it is okay to give this a swirl, because that will actually help to open it up if you like. I'm going to give it a little bit of a swirl, and then I'm going to take a little sniffy sniff. Oh, and it's got that lovely breadbasket-y yeast thing going on almost right away. Now, this sparkling wine is set to go with the champagne truffle and the toasted coconut. The toasted coconut truffle that you have could have either white chocolate on the top or it could be milk chocolate, but you'll be able to see the little sort of yellowish looking flakes on it that let you know you're having the coconut truffle. So I would say that if you're really doing the tasting, you want to just have a little bite. This is the coconut truffle. I'm going to take that out and show everybody. There you go. Want to have a little bite and taste a little bit of this bubble. I can't get past the nose. The nose alone is so exciting on this. Oh, lots of great flavor. I mean, a lot of crisp apple. I get a little bit of a citrusy element, but that brioche, that breadiness comes from the fact that sparkling wine, when it's made in the method traditionnel or metodo classico, method champenois, is aged on the lees in the bottling. And so that's the yeast cells, and that gives it that little bready hint, that little brioche note. So in this particular one, we can go to the next slide so you can see how sparkling wine is made. We'll rush through this at least a little bit quickly. As you can see, we start out with the still wine. You start out with the cuvee. From there, you do the tirage, which is when the wines are actually bottled with a little bit of the yeast, and that's where the secondary fermentation takes place. From there, you'll see them being riddled by hand. That's just a little bit of a turning. Also, when you're doing large amounts of sparkling wine, when it's made in this way, you'll do it in what's called a geopallet, which basically takes 50 cases and sort of shakes them up a little bit. And it's a mechanical way of doing it because hand riddling is very expensive and very few people even really do it anymore. And then the wine is aged on the lees. And that's what I was talking about with this. Some are aged for a long time. Various producers will do one. Dom Perignon makes one that's called P2, and it's aged for 2 decades. And then you do, again, as I said, riddling, and then finally disgorgement. So disgorging is actually when you remove all the yeast cells, and then you top it back up with a little bit of what's called the dosage or the liqueur d'expédition. That is a very carefully guarded secret because that's quite honestly what sets the level of dryness as well as the sort of house style. This particular wine, this Grape, is made, and you can jump to the next slide again, is made from a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That's Grape Winery that you see right there. So, you can see the little mountains on the side. You can tell that's in a dry, arid desert place. The desert's a fabulous place to grow wine grapes, quite honestly. You want them to really struggle for water and nutrients because that makes for a really impressive wine. Hopefully everybody likes this. I think it's really delicious and very, very easy drink. And quite honestly, in my opinion, this is the best sparkling wine made method champenois in the United States, sub $20 a bottle. I think it's fantastic. It's very easy to procure and really well known. And you get to drink something with a little bit of champagne history, but made in America and in all places, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Who would have thought? I hope you all like it.
Hey, Hudson, we do have a question that came in
Sure.
asking, what types of foods would you pair with the sparkling wine?
So I think it really depends. I like to go by the what it grows with, it goes with to some degree. So sparkling wine is unique in the fact that I think it works with virtually anything because sparkling wine sets the tone for celebration. Certainly works because of a little bit of effervescence. It'll cleanse the palate at almost every sip. So it'll work with a wide range of food. In so much as what it might go with specifically, great with oysters or shellfish, richer fish too, because that acidity will help to cut through some of that richness. But quite honestly, if you're a sparkling wine fan, and I'm a champagne lover. So for me, champagne goes with everything. And I'll follow a quote that I heard once when I was in New Orleans, which was, may your only pain be champagne. Or sparkling wine from somewhere else.
And that was our last question for now, Hudson, but we would like to remind everyone that if you do have a question, you can click the questions tab on your dashboard, type in your question and hit submit, and we'll communicate them to Hudson as he's going through the presentation.
So our next wine that we're going to talk about is actually a Pinot Noir. I made a joke here with this, the next slide, which is I know a lot about wine because I watched Sideways. In 2004, Sideways, the movie, just exploded the love of everyone to want to drink Pinot Noir. And prior to that, Pinot Noir, quite honestly, wasn't all that popular, which is, kind of strange considering how popular it is today. So Pinot Noir was grown in lots of different places because it's a grape that people do have this sort of iconic affinity with in terms of flavor profile. And Pinot Noir has the unfortunate aspect of being, quite honestly, a little bit difficult to cultivate. It doesn't like to grow everywhere. It only likes to be grown in certain climates. It's because it's a little bit thinner skinned. It's susceptible to shatter or breaking, as well as to a host of different, pest problems. In addition, as you can see from that picture right there, that is a Pinot Noir bunch. Now, Pinot Noir is a French wine grape, as is Chardonnay. There's actually a town called Chardonnay. And both of these grapes really more or less have their origin in Burgundy and France. So that cluster there is actually a cluster, and you can see how tightly packed, how tightly those grapes are together. It is, I think, one of the ideal clusters of Pinot Noir grape. And Pinot Noir gets its name from Pinot, which is pine, and Noir for black. So it was actually because this looked like a black pine cone. That's sort of where the name comes from. And this thought process of naming grapes in this way comes from various things. There's actually a little town in the Mâconnais called Chardonnay. There's Chardonnay grape planted around that. So the thought is that where Chardonnay comes from. And we're not doing a Chardonnay class, so I can't tell you all about Chardonnay for an hour. So in this particular case, the Pinot Noir that I had suggested is one from France, and specifically southern France. Now, in southern France, it's a little bit like the Wild West, especially in the regions like the Languedoc and Roussillon, which are right along the Mediterranean, which is where they cultivate a lot of the grapes, and they will put the varietal name on the label. Now, if you're looking at a lot of the rest of France, it's all about place names. You have to know that in Volnay, it's Pinot Noir, and in Chasson or Polligny, it's likely to be Chardonnay, or in Bordeaux, it's other red wine grapes. So in this particular case, when we go to southern France and in this area of the Languedoc and Roussillon, we get to have grapes that are known for one, but secondarily where they're actually on the bottle, so we know what the heck it is that we're drinking. And that's one of those things that makes drinking wine from other places around the world so daunting for so many people. I will say that you can get great bottles of wine over 20, 30, 40, up to several $100s. They'll be phenomenal. Some of them might even be life-changing. But a lot of really great wine is easily accessible for $15 or less. And for $15, if you don't know what it is, it's $15. It's, 4 coffees at Starbucks. Buy a bottle and drink it. If you don't like it, cook with it. If you really don't like it, dump it out. You didn't spend that much money, $15. It's like, why not try something? So in this particular case, I hope that you all got a Pinot Noir from southern France. And this one that I have is from Domaine Paul Mas. And this is a winery that he bought. It's called Domaine de Martinol. So if you can hopefully see that, it's Domaine de Martinol. This is a lovely wine that comes from this area and drinks, to me, a lot like how Burgundy drinks. It has similar flavor profile. So if you click over to the next slide, you can just take a glance here. I'm just going to pour. So French Pinot Noir, you're going to have flavors that I've listed out there, sort of cherry, hibiscus, rose petal, and then you get some more earthy flavors like, mushroom or potting soil. Some people may say things even like, saddle or leather, and you can get a little bit of that here. And Pinot, again, as I said, is made in various places in France and all around the world, but Burgundy is the most famous place in France for Pinot Noir. Now, I wanted this to taste like Burgundy. I feel that it drinks a lot like a Burgundy wine, but let's pick it up and give it a little swirl. Now, this should be going with your raspberry truffle. You can get a lot of flavors of raspberry and cherry out of this wine. And so I think that it's an ideal, this is where we're going to have a pairing that's kind of harmonious. So this raspberry truffle is the one that has the little pinkish streaks on there, or burgundy colored streaks on there, shall we say. So here we want to give this a little swirl. And again, take a little sniffy sniff. You can't really taste the wine unless you smell the wine. And it's very important to smell the wine. People are oftentimes, I'm good at swirling. I swirl wine all the time. I swirl Diet Coke. It's just more habitual than it is anything else. So I swirl to release the aromatics, the little molecules that carry smell and gather up into this open air portion. You'll notice that I only poured a little bit of wine in there because when we're tasting like this in an analytical way versus just trying to drink as much wine as possible, you really want to have a little bit in there so that you can see how the wine evolves. Now, I've got a classic burgundy-like color here. So hopefully you can see that. It might be difficult to see color, but it's sort of a light purple. Or classic in this case, this wine is really a ruby color. If you have a bottle, and let's say you're drinking a bottle of Burgundy, and it's got a little bit of that orange around the outside, we'll call that bricking, and that is more of a classic garnet. So it would be dark, sort of a purple in the center, and then sort of to the outside edge, you get a little bit of that orange, and then that's a classic garnet colored wine. So again, this is that really sort of light purple. Oh, the nose here. I mean, this is dynamite. So I'm getting all of this wonderful, again, raspberry and cherry on the nose, just really over the top. And I don't really get any elements of wood. I'm not picking up any oak, and I know that this wine does see a little bit of time in oak, probably about 6 months. Now, you notice, by the way, that what I'm doing there, I'm drawing a little bit of air in through my mouth while I have the wine in my mouth, and that causes the wine to bounce all over my palate. So I'm really tasting the wine more completely. This is a pretty great expression of what Pinot Noir is supposed to be. If you want to zip to the next slide, you'll see this lovely little arrogant frog label that I have on here for the wine that I may have suggested to everyone. So Arrogant Frog is also owned by Paul Moss. Paul Moss is an amazing guy. Was not a vigneron or a grape grower by trade in his family. His father had a wine cellar, and when he was a young boy, probably around 3 or 4 years old, he ran away from his mother. Not like running away from home, but just sort of ran away from his mom. And they found him hiding out in the cellar, and that was when his grandfather said he knew that his son would have something to do with wine. So then in university, he went off and he founded a wine appreciation club. He was at university in the UK, came over to the States and created a little import company, sold that off, went back to France, and started buying up some vineyard land, and really, just exploded into the world of wine. Makes this Arrogant Frog series, as well as owning the Domaine de Martinol, and then a few other wines as well. He is a lover of cars, of history, an impeccable French dresser. If there were a spirit animal that I could claim today, it would probably be Paul Moss. So I think, again, this is a great, lovely, very approachable at a young age Pinot. Something that's easy to wrap your head around, classic flavor profile, doesn't see a lot of time in oak, but very fresh and vibrant. Really, really tastes, what Pinot Noir should taste like, quite honestly.
Hey, Hudson, we have some guests that are asking if you could speak a little bit about the Les Charmel Pinot Noir.
About which one?
The Les Charmel, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
The Les Charmel Pinot Noir? Is that one
Yes.
that somebody picked up?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know where that one, they would have to jump in there because I don't know that particular Pinot Noir. But if they can tell me where it's from, I might be able to tell them a little bit more about it.
All right. Let's see. I'll wait for their response to come in. And then
Cool.
we'll let you keep going, and I'll interrupt when it comes in.
No worries, no worries. So yeah, I mean, there's great Pinot Noir produced all over the place. There's good Pinot from, obviously, in Europe. There's really good Pinot in Germany, quite honestly, which is kind of surprising. Germany having that cooler climate, region does work very well for Pinot. They tend to be a little bit lighter in style. They don't have that necessarily that earthiness. They're a little bit more vibrant and fresh. Great Pinot Noir in New Zealand, specifically, in Martinborough and Marlborough, some in Canterbury and Gisborne, great Pinot there too. And the New Zealand Pinots tend to be in that sort of lighter, fresher, vibrant style as well. We move over to California. They tend to be a little bit bigger, a little bit richer, a little bit more weight. And Pinot oftentimes, Pinot became so darn popular, and people were drinking and wanting that sort of heavier wine that a lot of producers, because Pinot Noir grapes weren't planted as prolifically as Merlot, which is what everybody stopped drinking when they saw Sideways, that they had to plant grapes all over the place. And all of a sudden, we were seeing Pinot Noirs pop up from places like Corsica, which is, great area. There's great wine there, but, you never would have seen it in the United States up until, 2004. The Willamette Valley in Oregon makes great Pinot Noir. There's good Pinot in Washington State as well. And they're all a little bit different. Wine is all about place. And the Pinot Noir grape is one that is incredibly good at transmitting the terroir of a particular place. And that's really what gives wine its character, is the place from which it comes.
Hey, Hudson, our guest got back to us with what region that Pinot Noir was from. And I hope I pronounced this correctly. It's the Languedoc region at the foothill of the Pairings. Yep, you got it?
Of the Pyrenees, yeah. So that's very similar to this. So it's going to have the same sort of flavor profile. You shouldn't get a lot of that intense earthy aspect to it. It should be a little bit on the lighter side, a little less of the barnyard element, but it could. Now, if it's a younger wine, you're going to get a lot more of the fruit flavors being out front and really present. Whereas if it's a little older, you're going to see the fruit start to fade, and then those other characteristics tend to come on. They just become a little bit more in front. So you get a little bit more of the earthiness, the woodiness, the leafiness. Whereas in the younger wine, and hopefully that one is definitely going to lean a little bit more toward that fresh vibrancy. And there's so many brands of wine out there that, you can find stuff just about everywhere you go that's going to be pretty darn good. I hope that one that you picked is solid. We're going to jump to Cabernet Sauvignon next. So again, Cabernet Sauvignon is a red wine grape that started out in Bordeaux, really probably as a chance pollination. So sometime in about the 17th century, the grape Sauvignon Blanc is crossed with Cabernet Franc and creates Cabernet Sauvignon. Sauvignon comes from sauvage or wild, and you put these two things together and you get the Cabernet with the Sauvignon. So they thought this might have been a wild expression of Cabernet Franc. Turns out that it's likely, again, sort of a cross by chance pollination that kind of happened, and you end up with this grape. Cabernet is probably the most easily and widely recognized red wine grape in the world. Almost everywhere you go, they tend to plant Cabernet Sauvignon. It's grown here in the U.S. It's certainly grown in France, which is where it really has its start, in the region of Bordeaux, where it's utilized as a blending grape. It's planted in Italy. Many of the Super Tuscans that you might have had previously use some portion of Cabernet Sauvignon. And up in the north, there's some producers that do 100% Cabernet. Even in Tuscany, there's some producers that do 100% Cabernet. It's planted in Australia, where it takes on different flavor profiles, especially in regions like the Margaret River, which are really exceptional for Cabernet Sauvignon. What I had suggested for everyone to pick up for tonight would be one from Paso Robles. Now, Paso Robles is part of the central coast of California. And this area is oftentimes considered to be sort of synonymous with maybe Red Zinfandel, which is maybe America's indigenous grape, even though it isn't. But it's a grape that most people would consider sort of California's one of its starting grapes. And it really does extraordinarily well in Central Coast. But so does Cabernet Sauvignon. And quite honestly, so does Merlot. So Cabernet Sauvignon in this place tends to be a little bit different than you would get in a place like maybe Napa Valley. In Napa, you're going to get a lot more angular tannin. And tannin is that sensation of dryness that we get on the sides of our tongue when we taste wine. It's something that's, it sort of strips the moisture out of your mouth. Acidity makes you salivate. You start to, refreshes the mouth to some degree. Wines with good acidity are wines that are great with food. And in this particular case, I've chosen Liberty School Cabernet Sauvignon. So Liberty School started out as the second label of a very famous winery called Camus, which actually was in the Napa Valley. Liberty School was made as a companion label to Camus in, I guess it was 1972, where it was released to utilize some of the fruits that really didn't make the cut into Camus at the time, and was something that they could sell for a really inexpensive price point, and yet still had this cachet to tie it back to Camus. And this was all Chuck Wagner doing this way back when, again, in the 70s, when, especially in Napa Valley, was just starting to become a region again. Prohibition really decimated the California wine industry, or would have been much further along by then. But some wineries survived Prohibition, for one, but then other wineries like Montelena, Camus, Stag Creek Wine Cellars, Sebastiani Family Vineyards, Diamond Creek, which is maybe, I think, one of the most iconic producers in all of Napa Valley, really started to thrive in the late 60s and early 70s. And the Hope family had a tie back to Chuck Wagner, so much so that Austin Hope actually worked for the Wagners at Camus and on some of their other projects too, when he was really learning about wine. So for this particular wine, we're really looking for a classic flavor profile. So this is going to work with your dark chocolate truffle, which is this one right here. So classic, and you've got that little bit of chocolate shavings on top. I really love these sweet as fudge truffles here. Are really killer here at Reading Terminal Market. You need to come down here and try these. If you didn't get these for tonight, you need to come here and get these things. Buy a really big box, because half of them won't make it home. So I'm going to pour out this Liberty School Cabernet. And take a look at this label, Liberty School. Very simple, easy to read label. You can find this on the shelves in almost every single store that's out there. And if you look at this color, this is really a dark purple color. Lisa, you can jump to the next slide if you want. I'm giving this a little bit of a swirl and taking a little sniffy sniff. And on here, I'm going to get some cedary kind of notes. I'm going to get a little bit of the fruit, some woodsiness. A little bit of that earth. And I almost get a little bit of chocolate in this wine on the aromatics. A little bit, and not like chocolate like these kind of chocolates, but almost like Hershey's cocoa powder. That sort of dried cocoa powder is showing up on the nose. And then I get a little bit of bell pepper, which is a little bit of a thing you get out of the pyrazines. And I'm just starting to get a little bit of that picked up too. Now, this is great. So you'll notice that this is not a super heavy Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a little bit lighter, almost a little refreshing. lots of that really bright red to black fruit up front. A little sort of almost, I guess, kiss of oak, and a little bit of that woodsiness. Again, the little cedar, and leafy quality that's touching base here. Oh yeah, this is dynamite. Hope Family Vineyards have, again, this is Austin who's really working this and making this very special. He's got another label called Austin Hope, which is a little pricier, but just under $40 a bottle. Gets great press from all the little wine magazine darlings. But this wine is great. And again, this is probably around $15, $16, $17 a bottle. And for those that maybe picked up something else from Paso, they're going to be similar in flavor profile. You're going to get that bright red fruit. Unless they're aged in oak for a long time, you'll get just a little hint of oak versus a lot of heavy oak. But really, really vibrant on the nose. Austin's, I would say, fairly acclaimed in his efforts. Sort of funny story about how the Hope family got Liberty School, which I'll tell you all is, this came about because the Hope family was producing more wine and didn't want to create another label. Basically, over the price of dinner and talking to Chuck Wagner, Austin and his father were lamenting about what they were going to do, with this the extra fruit and the extra wine. And so they came up with the idea that, hey, maybe we could buy Liberty School from you, if you're not going to use it, because, Chuck had shelved it at the time. And, through the course of their discussion, they ended up acquiring the label from him because of their familial relationship. I mean, Austin, like I said, had actually worked for the Wagners for a long, long time. They basically picked up the cost of dinner that night, and he handed them the label and said they could do what they wanted with it. And I think they've made a really fabulous run with this particular wine. The Hope family wines they're making about 300,000 cases of wine a year now, and that's a fair amount of wine, considering that their labels are not, generally speaking, big giant labels. They're not things that are all over the place. Although Liberty School is pretty well known. This is, it's all Cabernet Sauvignon. It does see a little bit of oak. There's about 10% of this going into New French and American oak for about 15 months. The balance is all done in stainless steel. And we should be on, and I think we are, this is the 2018 vintage. So, the 2018 harvest was a little wacky, not as strange as what we had in 2020 with all the fires. And 2019 was a big problem too, especially in Napa Valley. You're going to see the prices of Napa Valley wines start to skyrocket. That's really going to get out of hand quickly, especially for the ones that we think of as being things that are just, almost at the ready on the table. The prices are going to start to go up a lot. The growing season was pretty much the way it should have been. Rainfall was kind of average. July it got really, really hot, which is going to help these grapes come to a full-on ripening. Then, they allow it to be very ripe, but the vines tend to grow a little bit more slowly. And then, when the weather sort of evened out towards that second half, really moving July through, I guess, September, maybe end of September is probably when they went to harvest. You got full-on ripeness, sort of ideal grape, really ripe flavor profile, and the fact that you can make this and see the right amount of oak tends to work really well. I hope you are all really enjoying the Cabernet. Lisa, I had some beeping in my ear from the earbuds. They may have ended on us.
Oh no, I think we're still here.
Oh, good. Okay, I had some beeping. I thought it might have been from that. So good. I'm glad you're still there. Were there any questions about the Cabernet Sauvignon that anybody has, or even about the Liberty School?
We just have a question in general about these wines, and if you should be drinking them out of any special glasses.
Oh, wow. Yeah. If you want to get really, really crazy, there's a company called Riedel. And I met Maximilian Riedel a number of years ago, and I had heard, people pronounce it Riedel and, probably Riedel and, back and forth. And I actually asked him, how is it that he pronounces his last name? And he said with his Austrian accent, it is Riedel. And the Riedel family makes different shaped glasses for innumerable different varieties. So they have a couple of different Cabernet Sauvignon glasses, whether it's New World Cabernet or whether it's Bordeaux. They have glasses for Pinot Noir, New World Pinot Noir versus Burgundy, two different Chardonnay glasses. There are probably 20 or 30 different Riedel stemware glasses. And that's just in their series called Vinum. And then they have a higher end series called Sommelier. And those glasses are expensive. They'd be like $100 for a glass. For one glass, $100. And, the glass is very thin, high portion lead crystal, very, very delicate. You have to hand wash and be really careful. Because if it breaks, you throw away $100. I say it's no big deal to go out and spend $15 on the glass, on a bottle of wine, but $100 on the glass, and you break one, you'll be very upset with yourself. So this glass is a pretty common shape. At a lot of restaurants and places, you'll see a glass that kind of looks like this. Maybe it's got a little bit taller bowl. Maybe the bowl closes in a little bit more. That's to allow the aromatics to focus. I want to give, and again, I only pour a little bit in there because I really want all of those molecules that carry smell to gather up into this open air framework. And this is where you can really get your nose in there and smell the wine, which again, as I said, is a hugely important thing. You really need to smell the wine to taste the wine. 90% of tasting the wine is going on in your nose. Only 10% is really happening in your mouth because your palate only picks up a couple of things. You get sweet, salt, bitter, acid, and umami. You get savory aspect. So, and also texture. People don't think about texture. Texture is important when we're talking about wine and or beverages in general because that's about viscosity and weight, how it feels on the palate. So this is a light to medium-bodied Cabernet. And again, now that it's really starting to open up, boy, I just want to get in there and drink, another glass of this.
And Hudson, before we move forward, we do have another question that came in. And this guest is asking if you could talk a little bit more about the chocolate that you paired with this wine.
Sure. So, again, one of the things that I had mentioned is that, wine and chocolate don't always work super well together. But here we're working with a dark chocolate truffle. So with that dark chocolate truffle, you want to have something that's got a little bit more of a stand-up flavor profile, which is why I put the Cabernet Sauvignon with that. Now, if this would have been a very tannic Cabernet, that with the sweetness really would have fought with each other on the palate. So I wanted to have something that would be at the same intensity level for one and create sort of a harmonious experience. I picked dark chocolate because I feel like dark chocolate and Cabernet tend to work reasonably well together. In this particular case, you're going to be just a little hint of bitterness with the chocolate, but not so much. It's still very full and it's sort of silky and rich on the palate. And you have that with this Cabernet, where this is a little bit of that medium-bodied Cab. I think, again, really creates a beautiful balance. And without super intense tannin, I think it's a great matchup.
All right, and that was our last question for now.
Okay. So moving on to our last wine here, moving into what I said was any port in a storm. So this port that I've picked out for everyone is from a producer called Graham's, and this is their 6 Grapes Reserve port. Now, port itself is something that was really created almost purely out of necessity. So long about the 1600s, sort of the later part of the 1600s, the English and the French did not get along. They had warred, W-A-R, and then ED, warred. They went to war innumerable times. And during one of those periods of strife, the English actually were big consumers of Bordeaux. They were, and that's dives deep into the history where Henry Plantagenet, or Henry VIII, was married to Eleanor of Aquitaine, Aquitaine being the area that encompasses Bordeaux. And because of that, Bordeaux wines became very, very popular in England. Now, they also had inland trading routes because you could, travel up through the land. So when the English and the French went to war and went through strife, those trading routes were no longer accessible. Owning or getting Bordeaux was taxed very, very highly, and at times was actually even made illegal. So the English merchants went to their oldest seafaring ally, which was Portugal. And Portugal had amazing still wines, beautiful wines that were produced in country along the Douro River. And, you've got these beautiful mountainsides and these great vineyards and so on. And, they would take still wine and they would sail it up to England. And what either wasn't, sunk by, a warring ship, what wasn't maybe hijacked by pirates, would eventually make it into, a trading port in England. And when it arrived there, it had experienced, obviously no climate control. We're talking about the 1600s in a sailing ship for a period of time, sea air, which, permeated the wine. And, these wines would arrive in England and they were basically like spoiled. They were ruined. So they took to the process of, to stabilize the wines, they would dose them with a high alcohol neutral brandy, basically the clear brandy, unaged in oak. Now, imagine drinking that lovely Liberty School Cabernet that we had, only it would have 40% alcohol, 50% alcohol, because you were hitting it with that brandy to stabilize it. That would not be an enjoyable experience. It would just be all alcohol with that fruit. It would just be impossible to drink. So historically, the story is that one particular abbey started dosing their wine as they were making it for shipping early, pre-finished fermentation. So that would stop the fermentation. It would leave the wine sweet, but then with a higher alcohol content. And then when that arrived in England, it was still stable. So, that alcohol is that preservative. And it tasted pretty good. And that style developed a little bit of a connection for the English. They started drinking and enjoying it. And that's how, port became so popular, especially in England. Now, one thing that we should all know is the city that this was coming from, the city in Portugal, was the city of Oporto. And that's actually where we take all of our shipping places today. All of the various ports of call all get their name, a port from Oporto, from this great shipping city in the 1600s. So port itself is, probably around, the vineyards there are probably around 50-ish miles, 49 miles inland from the mouth of the Douro. And so they just had to make that short trip down the Douro River, which could be done on light barges, to actual large sailing vessels and then make their way up. Now, over the years, various styles of port were made. And you can see on here, on this next slide, I've got the various styles. White port, we don't see a lot of out there in the world. You can actually stay on the slide that we were on, Lisa, for a minute. So we don't see a lot of white port out there in the world. You don't tend to see a lot of rosé port out there in the world, but what you do see is a lot of tawny port and a lot of ruby port. Now, of those two principal styles, tawny wines tend to be a little bit more caramely, whereas ruby ports tend to be a little bit more fruit-driven. Now, both can be fairly expensive and some can be fairly obtainable. The Gram 6 grapes is, I think, right around 18, 19, 20, somewhere right in there. Whereas, if this were a vintage port, you could spend $300 for a bottle that you would still get the benefit of aging. Now, a port done like this, and this is a rule that's across the board pretty much any time. If you ever get a bottle of port And it's done in what's called a T cork, like this, where it has the shape of a T. Here's the cork portion, and then here's the cap, and this forms a little T. This is made to be consumed right away. This is not going to get better hanging out in your cellar. Not really, maybe for a little while, but you want to drink this, okay? Now, if you get a bottle of port that is in a driven cork, a standard cork that looks like a wine bottle, that will continue to age and develop for many, many years. I've been fortunate enough to drink some very, very old vintage port that has been absolutely phenomenal. And they're great wines. When held in your cellar for a proper cellar, at the right temperature without any light, they could be really, really spectacular. Tawny ports are all almost across the board made to be consumed. They're almost all done in a T cork, and they're made to be consumed right away. Now, tawny ports have a little bit of a nomenclature on the bottle where you have the various ages on them, whether you see a 10-year, a 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, or just, that it reads tawny. Now, that is not how long that bottle's been aging, okay? What that is actually the average age of all of the wine that goes into that bottle. So if you see it's the 10-year or 20-year, that means that's the average that everything in there has actually aged. And then when it's bottled to create a style for the various producers. Rams is a great house. Dow's is another one. Smith Woodhouse, Fonseca, Sandeman. These are all great port houses. Many of them are owned by the family that owns Graham's, which is a family called the Symington family. The Symington family creates the 6 Grapes Reserve port to signify the various varieties that go into the production of their 6 Grapes port. Now, many of them are really just sort of variations on a theme. They're different hybrids of Tinta Franco, Touriga Nacional, Tinta Ruiz, and so on. And don't get confused by these grape varieties. It's like saying Chardonnay to, somebody that has never heard of the word Chardonnay before. We know it's Chardonnay, but if you go to Portugal, they know these grapes. These are the grapes that are indigenous to those areas, and they know that these are grown there. So this 6 Grapes is made as, I really feel like Graham's entry level, but still a family reserve style. It's something that they would consume fairly regularly. Port is largely something that people would drink at the end of a meal, most often, and really consumed almost as a stomach settler to some degree, as a digestif. So I've paired this up with the Black Forest truffle and the milk chocolate truffle. So the Black Forest, I love that, that little bit of rich cherry kind of quality, great Black Forest cake, that I remember, classic German chocolate cherry cake. And then also with that milk chocolate truffle, which is a little softer. These are going to have really different flavor profiles when you taste these with this same wine. So if you want to give your port a little swirl and take a little sniff, one thing you're going to get probably on the nose straight away is a little bit of heat, a little bit of alcohol. And that's because this is hovering around 20% alcohol. Don't be afraid, by the way, 20%, still not that crazy, but it's port. That's what they should be like. So again, I want to give this another little swirl and then come back to sniff it again, because that first whiff, I just got heat. Here we go. Now we're starting to get a little bit of that cherry and raspberry element. That's what I want with that Black Forest. And I get a little bit of wood. I'm getting a little bit of an oak tone to this too. Oh, man. Classic port color. You're going to notice this is going to have a little bit of viscosity when you taste it. Oh, yeah, that little bit of weight. You'll also notice, too, that even though it's got all of this fruit, it's a little bit sweet. It still has acidity, because when you swallow this, you're going to start to salivate. That's part of really what makes it go with food. So that when you taste this, and what I would do is, I'll catch you all in time. I would actually have the milk chocolate truffle first and have a little taste of that, and then have a sip of this. And give yourself another sip or two of the port. I'm going to pour just a splash more in my glass and use it almost like intermezzo. between the two chocolates. So you don't go right from one chocolate to the other chocolate. You go from the chocolate to the port, then back to the chocolate to the port, then back to the other chocolate. Do it that way, because then you're really going to set your palate up. It'll almost be a little bit of a roller coaster, quite honestly, because you'll get all these little flavors sort of tinkering around. It kind of makes it fun. Something else that I maybe should remark on, because I do this a lot of times just without thinking about it, is also where you hold your glass. As some of you may have noticed, I always hold my glass by the stem. You can always tell the real wine snob in the room because they try to hold their glass down here. The further they get away from the bowl of the glass, that's the snobbier the wine person tends to be. Eventually, I'm going to be able to hover. The bottle's good glass is going to levitate over my palm. But what you want to do is you do that so that you don't intentionally or unintentionally warm your wine. Now, everything that I have, I've got at cellar temperature, which is, I keep the wine cellar at about 58 degrees. And that's an optimal temperature for keeping wine aging for a longer period of time versus having the wine be ready for immediate consumption. I would say if you have a cellar, take a wine out, let it sit on the table for 5 to 10 minutes, and, then it's ready to drink. I hope you all are really digging the port. Yes?
Could you show our guests which chocolate truffle they should be drinking with this? I'm sorry, eating with this wine?
Please. Yeah, absolutely. So here we have this one, which is the Black Forest, the dark with those little flecks of pink this time versus the stripes that we had on the raspberry. And then the milk chocolate, which is this one, which is the lighter caramely brown with, again, that lovely little bit of chocolate specks on the outside.
And we actually do have a question that came in. Our guest is asking if you could briefly speak about the temperatures you should be drinking these wines at.
Right. So I like to consume everything almost at cellar temperature, so about that 58 degrees for that first little splash, and then let the wines come up. You want to drink, the white wine should be served at roughly refrigerator temperature, that 45-ish degrees, at least here in the States. Champagne, sparkling wine, I drink at refrigerator temperature. I think that Americans tend to drink their wines a little too cold, whereas if they just let the wines warm up a little tiny bit, maybe in the 60s, they would get a more complete tasting experience out of them. And that's where I like my red wines too. I want them to be in those low 60s, 64-ish degrees is what I feel is an optimal drinking temperature for wine.
And that was our last question for now.
Okay. Well, it is almost 6:30. Do we have any more questions to jump through?
Yes, we actually do. So one of our guests is asking if there's a difference in regards to a cork versus a twist off for wine.
Sure. So twist off, depending on the type, is referred to as what's called Stelvin closure. And Stelvin closure is a great seal for wine. Firstly, you never have bad bottles of wine because of exposure to a chemical compound called 2,4,6-trichloroanisole, which is what in the wine world we refer to as a corked wine or corky wine. That's when the wine will take on this sort of wet newspaper characteristic, which is really off-putting. About 5% of all the wine that's done in a cork finish will actually be tainted with this chemical. It's a byproduct of the sterilization process. So cork being tree bark is harvested and it's sterilized in a chlorine-like solution. And the chlorine will react with the bacteria and produces its byproduct in an anaerobic environment, an environment without air, sealed up in that bottle, this chemical compound of 2,4,6-trichloroanisole. So I'm a fan of Stelvin closure. I think it's absolutely fine. In some places, it's actually preferred. For a lot of white wines that you're going to drink young and fresh, things like Vino Verde or Albarino and a lot of Chardonnay, Stealth enclosure is, totally preferred. For bartenders in restaurants, they all want everything to be in screw cap because it makes their lives so much easier.
All right, and we have time just for one more question. And our guest is asking, how do you keep an open bottle of wine fresh?
So what I would suggest, and there are a couple of ways. If you've got an open bottle of wine and you don't have any of the devices that are utilized today to keep that bottle fresh, there's actually a little stopper that you can get with an air pump, and you can suck out all the air and do that. But quite honestly, an easy way to do it at home, especially if you're going to drink that bottle over the next 4 days, which is a good lifespan. You don't have to do anything special to keep the wine for 4 days. Put the cork back in the bottle, and not just a little bit. You want to really put it back in there. And then, quite honestly, whether it's white or red, throw it in the refrigerator. Just like food, wine is produce. So if you throw it in the refrigerator, that's going to extend its lifetime. And if it's a red wine and you're concerned, I'm drinking it too cold, take it out of the refrigerator, open it up, pour the glass that you're going to drink, and then just set it aside. Let it sit for 20 minutes or so while you're still cooking, or those 20 minutes while you go change into some more relaxed home clothes. And then over those 20 minutes, it'll come up enough that you'll be able to drink it and really enjoy it. You'll be able to extend that wine out.
All right, and that was all the time we had for questions, Hudson. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And we would like to thank everyone for joining our wine and chocolate pairing tonight. There will be a short survey sent out. We would love to hear your feedback to help us improve for future workshops. We'll be hosting another virtual workshop on Thursday, February 24th for first-time homebuyers, and we hope you guys can join us. And once again, thank you for joining us tonight. Have a great night.